I should have said the poet. The poet. I should have said the poet. The poet.
Sending poets.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas. Our goal is to understand metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. My name is John. With me is Bob and Tucker. What's up, guys?
Morning, guys.
Hey, what's up, guys?
And we are going to continue our poetizing of LGBTQ plus ideas. So last episode, we left off with the question that did come up during that conversation with my neighbor. We haven't really talked through it, so it seemed like let's do that now. I'm going to actually read the way you wrote the question, Bob, because I like the words used here. So the question is, what is the age of being a minor and having a parent or guardian legally, morally in charge of and responsible for deciding on everything, versus the age of majority where the person becomes legally, morally in charge of their own life and decisions that impact their life. So I think I'll speak for all three of us briefly that I don't think any one of us expects that there is an objective age that works 100% of the time. But it's useful to have a guideline. Right now, I think for many things, 18 is like a guideline year for many things about being a human and growing into responsible for your own actions kind of a being, right? But if we narrow this into specifically LGBT stuff, hormones, surgeries, these kinds of things, maybe I think that's where we want to try to focus, like what age kind of makes sense to think about as a guideline at best. So any one of you guys want to start off?
Well, I'll start because we already briefly discussed this, but like anything else in nature and biology, there is no set limit. There's no binary position. And so what I was proposing was something like a Turing test. And anybody not familiar with the Turing test, this is a test we have developed to run on computer systems. And it is a test where you're trying to see if a computer can fool you into thinking it is a human, where it is seamless enough, where it is responsive enough, diverse enough in its responses to make you believe that you're talking to another person instead of a computer. And, I probably should have looked this up. I don't think any computer has passed this test yet. I could be wrong. I
think there's some gray area for the most part. I don't think there's like a definitive
I don't remember seeing any article like, hey, we did it. So I don't know that that's happened, but I think we need to use something like that when it determines, are you an adult? Can you conceptualize the consequences of your actions? Are you able to predict the consequences of your actions? Can you take responsibility for the consequences of your actions? And that's not something that's going to have an age number limit to it. There's going to be 10-year-olds who can pass this. There's going to be 40-year-olds who can't.
Yeah.
And I see that as especially as AI develops, I see that as being a very useful tool to determine the emotional intelligence of individuals. And I also see AI as being a very useful tool in probably education in the future. And I think they kind of go hand in hand is once you can see where there are deficits, you can then develop programs to strengthen those deficits. And maybe we do create a generation in the future where kids are emotionally and functionally adult at 15.
Right.
Now, of course, you're going to create all sorts of legal nightmares where that's going to become an issue, but that's just something we're going to have to deal with as a society as society changes.
Yeah.
But I think the creation of a tool like that could be very useful in many aspects of being a teenager. And there's kids who are in shitty situations who probably at home need to get out of that situation. And if we can develop the tool to say, okay, you're functionally an adult, we will help you get out of that situation and emancipate yourself from the horrible parents that you have.
Yeah. Lot to say about that. Yeah. First of all, like really, I really like the idea of like think that just the line of thinking that there's probably like some tools we can create that is going to help this thing versus just trying to settle on like a few people hashing it out and making a decision or whatever, like case by case, actually, what a novel idea, involve the individual in this process, you know what I mean? And then, yeah, logistically could be a nightmare trying to, what questions, who decides what questions, how is this test administered? Like that could be a logistical nightmare. I wanted to share my experience as, again, the father of a trans kid. Because I don't think I've shared much detail with you guys, and I think you might be interested to hear how it kind of went. So I won't go into too. Actually, before we do that, I don't fancy myself a history buff or anything, but it is interesting that Alan Turing himself was, a homosexual who was not treated very well. I mean, that's putting it lightly. He was chemically castrated by the British government as a thank you for helping, decipher the Enigma machine and break Nazi, cryptography. But oh, you're gay. Sorry, buddy. And it's a really tragic story for someone
Yeah.
who was like such a genius, and it was
Well,
such
and
a
I'm glad you brought that up
no.
because he wasn't just chemically castrated. He was sentenced to death for homosexual acts.
Yeah,
And they
right.
gave him chemical castration as an alternative to that. And so I think it would be very fitting if we still called it a Turing test and gave him that credit to help these individuals who need the help
Yeah,
and have that be part of his legacy. I think would be poetic, to say the
yeah,
least.
yeah. Exactly. I was gonna say the same thing, just kind of
Can,
tragically
can I
poetic,
throw
but
can I throw something out here real quick? That
of
was
course, yeah, yeah,
so I love the idea. First of all, I think it's brilliant. My framing of it, now that you went this direction, it's apropos. I was going to call it the Doogie Howser MD test.
oh, yeah,
It's one of these concepts of if anybody hasn't seen the show, it's an old timey show at this point. I think
it's been
a young
rebooted,
kid.
so there may be a generation that doesn't know that this goes back to the late '80s, '90s,
Yeah, I want to say
right?
late '80s, '90s. Yeah. And I also believe the actor who played Doogie Howser did come out as
He is,
being,
yeah,
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 he's
I
gay,
can't
yeah,
remember the gentleman's name. Neil
Neil
Patrick
Patrick
Harris.
Harris, yeah,
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 exactly. Thank you. I just thought that was a funny coincidence there.
yeah, yeah,
But I love the idea. On the flip side, though, I think the problematic area is going to be, and this is kind of a random thought, but towards the 40-year-olds, like what happens if you cannot pass this test? And I have a little tiny anecdote here. So I live in an area near Yellowstone, and there's a lot of bears out here, and so you need bear-proof containers. But the story goes, when they're testing bear-proof containers, that there's a not too insignificant overlap between the smartest bears and the dumbest humans. So they can make bear-proof containers that humans cannot open up. And so you have to make it able to be not just outwitting the smartest bears, but also able to be opened by the least bright humans who are on vacation. So I do think it's going to be a logistical issue, but I love the idea. I think it's fabulous.
Well, and I also think this kind of tool can be used in different ways. I look at the child prodigies, and we're sticking these kids in college courses when they are prepubescent, and is that really the best thing for them? I mean, do they have to be educated that much that early and miss out on the whole child development phase that every other person on earth goes through, where you're a kid, just go be a kid. Like, there's time to be a prodigy later. Like, you don't have to do this one thing just because you're good at it. And we noticed you have this skill at this young age. These kids don't have a say into being pigeonholed into this life. And it's oftentimes ends up tragically for them, where they are not well developed adults because they never had that shared experience that everybody else had growing up. And
Yeah, looking at you, Michael Jackson. Oh,
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, what happens? Who's making the choice? I think this is fundamental to what we're talking about. Let's just say you have the capacity. Let's say you are a little Doogie Howser and you have the ability to pass the test. Is it in your best interest then to either follow what your parent guardian says or to oppose? I mean, it's a very complicated issue, is my point.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be able to foresee with clarity? I think it's always hindsight, where you could look back and say, you know what, you should have listened to your mom, or you know what, you should have gone out on your own. You could have done it.
Yeah.
So that's the difficult part.
I think I don't know if it's the solution, but if there is a solution that helps it be less difficult, it's got to have, strong communication at the base foundation level, so I can appreciate the possibility, like Tucker said, where maybe people who don't maybe have the kid's best interest in mind, or maybe aren't thinking about like long-term effects and are just like, you're really good at this, you should just do this, you're really good, like just maybe that doesn't help. But then on the flip side, just sorry real quick, just on the flip side is like, if the kid is really interested and the parents maybe are the ones in charge of making decisions, I suppose, but feel that there is a really I'm just going to go back to the what I was saying before we started recording, this audiobook of Ron and Clint Howard's kind of shared autobiography, and their experience growing up with parents who were like super supportive, but both of them got into acting like really young, and it just sounded, by their account, that it was great. Like, the parents were super supportive, but they weren't like, you have to do this because we need money and you're the breadwinner now. I mean, they were just supportive and loving parents. And so I see that side too. And I think, so to go back, I don't know if this is what you're about to ask, Bob, but like, yeah, how do you even know, is this Turing test like a mandatory thing, like a legally required thing? I think not. I don't think that's helpful. I think it's like a tool. Like, if this is helpful, make sure it's available to anybody that could benefit from it.
I was going to expand upon the concept of, instead of like a multiple choice math test or something. I know that's not what you're talking about, but really maybe more about not what you know, but emotional awareness. Going back to, being a fully fledged human. People jump ahead, like we're talking about taking advanced courses very early, or getting tutors. Maybe you're a violin prodigy and you just kind of poo-poo your schoolwork, but you're all in on 12 hours a day of practicing your scales, etc. I mean, like, that's not really well rounded in any shape. You know, like what maybe the test is more about emotional adulthood and like getting away from the intellectual side. Maybe intellectual is a component of it, but I don't know. I mean, but I fear because like how many adults are well balanced emotionally? I know I wasn't
Sure,
for many years.
sure.
So it's,
I mean, yeah,
it's scary.
there's a ton to be said about, I I don't know what you guys' day to day is, but like at Progressive, like, mental health awareness is like a major thing in the last several years, especially since COVID. Every so often, um, just some topic comes up. Do you guys know who Kevin Love is?
Sounds familiar.
He's a basketball player. Again, I'm not a big sports guy, but he had a panic attack during a game in like 2017, I think, during halftime, like freaked out, like really bad, panic attack. And he, you know, he was in this mindset, this kind of culture mindset of like, men don't cry, men are tough, don't let anybody find out, you'll lose your job. And he totally went against that and was like, I need to write about this, because he ended up, talking to a therapist and getting help, and he published this article, and it kind of, in the basketball community, I think, kind of shook up things a bit, that a lot of people were like, holy crap, yeah, like I can actually kind of relate to that. And I always thought I had to keep this to myself. So I think there is a shift happening. Anyway, why did I bring him up? He came and did a speaking event at Progressive, and the CEO like interviewed him. It was fucking fantastic to hear, his story. And I think all these, there's just like so many instances like that where a cultural shift is happening, that, men don't have to be these tough, never cry, never show feelings because we're men and we're tough. And, there actually is power in being vulnerable and opening up. So I do see that kind of a shift happening. I think that ties to like the emotional, regulation and emotional health, emotional wisdom, emotional experience, that I think is just going to get more and more important for our species as we go on, because this is a gateway to empathy. I just really am a big proponent that, like, it's hard for me to envision a future where in general we're less empathetic. I just don't see that happening. I just think it's this natural progression that we're just, as a species, learning and becoming more empathetic with other humans. I can keep going on and on about this, but let me go back to the kind of Turing test and my experience with Jay, coming out. So I'll try to keep it to, specific things that tie in with this kind of Turing test. It wasn't, I briefly mentioned this, but it wasn't like Art Club movie. It wasn't just one day he came home and was like, I'm trans. This was a long progression. And so one of the first things was pronouns and clothes. He was just recognizing, like, I don't feel like good in like female clothes. I'd rather wear like more masculine clothes. Cool. That was pretty easy. The pronoun things, I can go into that someday, but that was one of the first steps. So, and these things went on for 6-8 months before any notion of hormone therapy was even brought up. Okay. So then, there's a children's hospital in Denver that was kind of for gender diversity, that I had found out about. So I called them in June, just about 2 years ago, the end of June 2022. And I was put on 2 wait lists, that the earliest would have been 8 months. So, the first wait list was going to be a just video appointment with endocrinologist, or I guess, sorry, it was a psychiatrist, not an endocrinologist. Just telehealth, kind of like introduce, each other, learn our names, and find out like, why are we meeting, right? And that appointment was primarily the psychiatrist asking questions to Jay. Like, Kim and I were there, but we didn't pipe in very much. It was mostly Jay, answering questions. So I felt really good about that. Like, they really seemed like they were curious about is this the right thing from the very first thing that wasn't even in person, right? The very first appointment. The second appointment was like a month later, and it was in person with an endocrinologist. Same thing. Kim and I were there, but it wasn't about us saying what's going on. It was about them talking to Jay and getting his take on things. And then, if we certainly could chime in if we wanted to, but it was, it definitely wasn't like our decision that he's going to do this because it's going to make him feel better. It's like he's suggesting this. This is brand new to us. We need to learn about this. So, oh, you're an endocrinologist. This is what you do every day. Like, you know about hormones. Like, great learning opportunity for us, right? So, so all those things happened. Again, I the first call to make appointments was in June. By the time we actually met with them, it was later in 2023, and then I think it was like August. So it's coming up on a year. I think that he actually got, a prescription for testosterone. I will say another hormone, medication that he got that I think this is important knowledge to share widely, because especially if your only avenue into this whole LGBT space is a movie like Art Club movie, there's a line where the mom says these hormones are giving people cancer and like reduces like bone structure. And she doesn't say which medicines. She doesn't give any like evidence at all. She just says this pretty like nightmarish kind of thing. Like, it's no evidence, right? Okay, so another hormone that Jay got on, it's called norethindrone, and it's a cycle suppression medication, otherwise known as birth control. Like, it's the same it's the same medication he could have been on anyway if he just like wanted to be on birth control. But I don't, you guys think that's important to know when somebody's being critical about like, oh, these hormones, and like, it's the same hormones a cis person would be taking. Anyway, so I had to get that out of the way. Okay, so then, but I wanted to say about the testosterone again, like, it was this long period before we even got the prescription. Well over a year, about 14 months before we actually got the prescription. And in that time, in order to get the prescription, we had I think we actually had 2 appointments face to face with an endocrinologist at that point, but they wouldn't write the prescription until they got a letter from a therapist saying like, I also recommend that this is the right thing to do for this person. So, and Jay had been seeing a therapist. So what I'm getting at is I like the idea of a Turing test, but guess what? What's happening now is very similar. It's good news. It's good news.
Exactly.
Like, the process of again, based on my experience, but not even just my experience, because again, I work at Progressive and these employee resource groups, which someday I'm gonna have to side carrot into that because it's massive how beneficial these employee resource groups are. But for now, I'll just say like that same story about it being a long process involving multiple people. It's not a knee jerk, just, oh, I'm trans today and I'm going to go to Walgreens and get, hormones to alter my life. That doesn't exist. I really don't believe that exists, at least in America. I don't know like the whole breadth of experience around the world, but for sure in America, I just don't think that that's a reality. If anything, it's just fear mongering and scare tactics.
And there's this whole idea that these hospitals are just chopping dicks off of kids, and it's just a lie.
Yeah.
That does not exist in America. Nobody is doing that.
My understanding is for sure like top surgery isn't it's legally not allowed until the person is 18 years old.
Yeah.
But I know there's some exceptions because in that J.K. Rowling, Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling podcast, the host interviewed a trans male, young kind of male who grew up with Harry Potter, and it was he was really invested in the whole thing that was happening with J.K. Rowling, kind of saying things that people were just saying she's anti-trans and stuff. And anyway, the point is he had mentioned he got top surgery when he was 17, and it was because he was at a place in his life, and again with support from parents and therapists and everybody, but he was just like, I can't keep going. I can't go on like another like whatever 6 months or whatever to be 18. And everyone was like, yeah, the 6 months, it's pointless. He's going to do this anyways. And this could actually save his life if we do it 6 months earlier. So to me, that just lends itself to this importance of it being case by case. And even if like a test, an objective like test could be agreed upon, the logistics all come together and everybody's like, these are really good questions to really assess if a human is capable of wielding their destiny in their hands by making decisions. Like, I still think that there has to be some like flexibility and wiggle room, because just being rigid for rigid's sake, I just don't think lines up with the reality that many, and maybe it isn't even many people, maybe it's even just a small percentage, but I don't think that means you ignore the small percentage just because it's a small percentage. Like everybody deserves to be happy. I really believe every human being deserves to be happy, comfortable with themselves, so.
I agree. And, I had a thought while you were talking about this, and it may be a little controversial, and it may make a certain segment of the population uncomfortable to wrestle with this truth. And good. Like, I think being uncomfortable is sometimes a good thing that leads to growth.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
if you were a mammal and you were male, you're already trans. Because every single mammalian embryo starts as a female,
right. Yeah,
without exception. And to make that female embryo into a male is all just a hormonal process that happens through pregnancy, through no choice of that individual embryo at all. And oftentimes no choice of the mother. Like, they can't control what hormones their body's producing during this time.
right.
And so like, just accept that fact. If you're a dude and you're the biggest, machoest, straightest dude ever, you used to be a woman. Okay?
Yeah, right. Everybody, yeah, like you
Just
said,
accept that
every
fact.
fetus starts.
And then accept the fact that not everybody made it all the way to the super macho masculine man that you are hormonally. And that there's a whole variety between you and a woman that all deserve and should be allowed to exist comfortably in their own skin, without
Right,
persecution, without alienation, without discrimination.
right.
Just hands down as a human right. That's the way it should be.
Preach, my friend. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just chime in real quick.
Yeah.
This little pedantic nitpick here, but female and woman, I would be careful, because woman and girl are so arbitrary. Right?
Sure.
There is no
True.
line there. Female, we talked about this on the last part of the last segment with the biology. Another way to term that is the one with the large gametes. Male, the one with the small gametes.
Right.
But anyway, that was very nitpicky. But I just because of the fact that we're talking about age, and to me, woman and girl, or boy and man, are exactly center of target here. And by the way, really appreciate you, John, opening up, giving an example, a real world example. I think it's very illustrative to someone like me, where I don't have a lot of real world examples. And so you sharing your lived experience and your son's lived experience, your family's lived experience, very powerful for me, and hopefully others who listen to this who do not have the context to put this into. But let me jump off of what you said, and I'm breaking this into like a game theory standpoint of what are the possible outcomes. We're talking about a parental or guardian and a minor child. And there are three that I can see. One is in your case, John, where you and your child are on the same page. Seems pretty clear cut. You get some medical Turing test, for lack of a better word, and nobody's antagonistic in this relationship, except for maybe third parties that are not part of your family. Let's look at the other two that I can see. So one of the other two is going to be a child wants this, but the parents don't. And then the third option is the parents want this, but the child doesn't.
Yeah.
So I see three potential. I don't know if there's any more out there. Correct me if I'm wrong. I see only three potential outcomes of this example.
Just for the sake of it, probably one where maybe on the fringe, but maybe neither the child or the parent want it, but like the society, the culture around them
Okay, I'll take
want
that.
it, maybe. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. So
Yep.
so I think that's fair. So we have four. We have four potential outcomes where it's all in agreement, all in opposite, or all in agreement, and then maybe all in opposition, but third party is telling you this is the way it should be, and
Yeah.
then a split each way where parent is pro, child is con, and vice versa.
Mhm.
Okay, so those are the all possible outcomes. So I don't think, just like we talked about with suppressing left-handedness and stuff like that, or being homosexual, lesbians, I don't think anybody is going to tail an adult human being in this world. I mean, there are some, don't get me wrong, there are definitely some, but they're going to age out and they're going to be less and less impactful going forward, in my opinion. What I'm trying to get to is what happens in the conflict zones. So let's discount the fact that the government will tell you, you were born this and I'm going to make you that, and the parents and the child are opposed to that. Let's just say that's a dystopian look, and we don't have to wrangle that just yet. Let's just say. So we have two instances then. One is a parent wanting to promote, saying, I see this in you. I see you are not who you were assigned at birth. I see you as being something different. And the child opposes. And then the flip side, the child sees themselves as dysphoric in their appearance and biology, and they wish to change themselves and do so sooner rather than later. So my question then is, that's the difficult part. What do you do when we come to this point of contention and we have age of consent? And just as a framework, I know everybody listening knows this, but you probably can't get a tattoo until you're 18. You probably can't sign a contract. You can't join the military. You can't get married. You can't
vote.
Can't vote. Thank you. Can't buy cigarettes or alcohol. Blah blah blah. I mean, there's a series of benchmarks that we do. That's why I like the Turing test, because it does kind of jump over that hurdle. But
yeah,
most people can't get elective surgery. They can't do breast augmentation or whatever. Cosmetic. Get a nose job or something. Probably. I may be speaking out of my ass here, but I think most minors are not going to be able to go, even if they have the money. They're not going to be able to go and get independent elective surgeries. I would think, I guess, I don't know. But so that's what I'm going to pose to the group then is, what do you do in the instance where there is tension and conflict there and it's not a unified process?
Yeah. One thing I'll say is, like, start again from a place of I don't know, like, well, I guess I kind of want to say common ground, but I don't know if that is the right term here, but
Curiosity, maybe, like trying
well,
to
yeah.
understand.
Yeah, well, for sure that. And I was going to say of just like recognizing other things that may not be obviously like related, but are obviously related. Like a couple episodes ago, Bob, you shared, the whole practice of circumcision,
Exactly. Yes.
that's a thing that, like, culturally it's accepted. The person being circumcised generally has no say in it. You know what I mean? It's just like the culture and the parents or whatever is like, well, this is what we're going to do. So I think, in combination with like the curiosity and like, by the way, it's not like this is some completely brand new territory that we don't have any, previous experience to draw from. Come on, there is like previous experience we can draw from. And so my answer, though, to your question is I really think at the root of it, it's like, as long as the kid, in this case, as long as the kid is, feels like they're in a comfortable, safe space to say what they might want to say, whatever it is, without fear of being, judged, persecuted, disciplined, beaten, kicked out of the house. You could go on and on. But like I think that no matter what, like that is so important that the kid, this idea of safe space, I'm a huge fan of it. It's a very magical thing to me, and that's what it means is like if I need a safe space, it's because I need to say something that's been rattling around in my head that I don't want to just rattle in my head anymore. I need to get it out, and I need to say it without fear of being judged or, made fun of or whatever. I just have to share this. And, I'm just beyond grateful that I have my wife for that, because it has come in handy countless times, for both of us, of just like, hey, by the way, I just need this safe space here, and the lift, that we both feel when we're able to just share things. So that's a huge thing for me, is that regardless of who's in your scenario there, Bob, if the kid is for it and the parents are against, or vice versa, I really think that the kid deserves. Sorry, I'm not trying to say only the kid. I think it's important for the parents to have safe space as well. But I guess if my needle tips one way or the other, I really think like this is probably just because it's my own personal experience, but it's easy for me to gravitate towards this idea that the parents are there to guide along, not force or tell this is what you're supposed to do. They're just, parents are at best like guides.
Yeah.
What do you need help with? How can I help you? Versus you have to do this because I say so. You know what I mean? So I really think the needle for me tips towards like the kid, as long as they're comfortable and feel like they can say whatever. It's hard for me to see that turning sour in a way, that like that's a great foundation. Again, curiosity, all these things is like a starting place. I think just is going to perpetuate a much more positive, helpful experience in the long run.
Well,
that's my answer.
To me, like, and I don't know because I've never had to look into this, so I don't know if something like this exists already, but it should. I have, in my personal experience, heard parents say, I would rather my child die than end up gay.
Oh, yeah. No,
I've heard this with my own ears.
Yes, I've heard that
There
too. Yeah,
needs to be an organization where a kid, and I mean, any kid who's old enough to pick up the phone can call them and go, I am not in a safe environment. I need to be removed from my parents' control because they would rather me die than be me.
Be who I am. Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that does exist.
There should be adoption agencies and stuff for stuff like this, and we can do a whole other one on adoption because that's a near and dear topic to myself, and it's very sticky. But there needs to be things in place to get children removed from homes like this. Like that's not,
especially when it's
not healthy, because you're basically being raised in an environment to kill yourself. That's what it is. You're being raised to kill yourself because you are not being given the love and the caring environment to develop into an adult. You're basically being told every day, you either change your brain, which you can't do like that. You don't choose to be gay. You don't choose to be trans. This is just the condition of your brain. You can't raise kids like that. It's awful. It's the highest form of abuse, Yeah. And there needs to be programs in place to, if that's your, I'm of the opinion, if that's your opinion as a parent, is that I would rather have a dead child than a gay child, you shouldn't be a parent. Period. Period.
Yeah. It's really hard for me to, I want to try to be sympathetic and empathetic and see things, but statements like that. My experience. Oh, by the way, I will say Colorado Springs. Yeah, Inside Out Youth Services. I can't remember if I told you guys much about them, but that it was instrumental. The therapist that Jay saw, they actually set up a parent group, and that was huge to share. It was like 8 other couples. I may have already said this, and so I apologize if I'm duplicating that, but it was huge for both Kim and I to just sit and hear experience from other parents of, queer youth and what it was like for them. I will say on that sentiment um, of a parent saying, I didn't hear that. What I heard wasn't I'd rather they be dead, but it was this very the timing was weird. It was before Jay came out, but it was interesting because this person was asking me this hypothetical in the context of Kim. He said, "Can you imagine one day if Kim was like, 'Hey, I want to show you this,' and pulled out a photo album and was showing me all these like pictures of like a baby boy." And I'm like, "Cool, but who is this?" And he's like, "Can you imagine if she was like, 'Well, that was me. That's how I was born.'" And it was a weird question he was asking me because like, well, I've seen Kim's baby pictures. Like it's purely hypothetical. How do I really, what would I do? It was kind of a weird question. But in that context, he said something about like, if any of my kids said they were trans, I would disown them. So it's not the same as like, I'd rather they be dead, but it was like, I wouldn't want anything to do with them. And I just thought, now this is a person who has adult children. So it wasn't a case of like, a child that I thought like, oh my God, get this child out of this house. It wasn't like that. Truly, because I know this person, I was like, I don't believe you, dude. Like that's a cruel, heartless thing to do, and you're not a cruel, heartless person. So I just felt like he was just saying it to because maybe he thought that's what it was a really weird thing. And so I've only briefly talked to him once or twice since Jay came out, because it's like, hey, remember that time you asked me that weird question and said that really like horrible shit about if you had a trans kid? What do you think about it now? You know what I mean? Like I haven't like breached it that way, but it is very interesting. Because I don't think it's hard for me to imagine that a parent would be that way. But I know it happens. I heard those stories at Inside Out. Like that's why they existed, is because people didn't, teenagers didn't have a safe place at home. And there was this like community they could go to for like an hour or two a day and just like breathe,
I really think a lot of it has to do with the human brain is just a decision maker, good, bad, yes, no. And most of these people have never even attempted to look into the phenomenon at any sort of in-depth level, never had the conversations we're having now, never tried to approach it from an angle of understanding and empathy. They just go, not like me, bad. But it's like,
Yeah.
I would turn around and say to those parents, if your kid ends up being gay or trans, it's your fault. If you look at that child as being a failure, then you have to accept that it's a failure of your biology. It's not the kid's fault. It's your fault.
Mm.
Own it. And then they go, well. No, no. If we're talking about a biological phenomenon, and you are the donor of that biology, you created that.
Yeah.
So if you look at that child as a failure, that's your failure. So maybe just look at that child as, this is my child.
Yeah.
And I'm going to raise them in a loving home no matter what, because I created that. It's not that hard.
Right. It does seem on the surface like, yeah, like who would choose not to do that? And, it's, I don't think it truly, like it, at the end of the day, like there are times where it isn't that simple, but I do think I see this shift happen. That's part of the reason I think awareness and stuff is so important. By the way, like, I probably could just keep going on and on, but I wanted to circle back to your question, Bob. Like, did you have an answer kind of for yourself? Like, what do you do with the?
I have a principle. My principle is, in life, I've noticed that two things should go hand in hand, and that's responsibility and authority. So if you have an institution, an organization, a team, whatever you want to call it, where someone has responsibility for something but no authority, things go wrong. And if you have someone who has authority for something but no responsibility, things go wrong.
Mm.
So in this quadrant example, game theoretic of what are the potential outcomes, putting aside the two that are child and parent are in agreement on one side, or child and parent are agreement on the other side, and you just look at these two where You have disagreement between child and parent. I don't have an answer, but my tension is squarely on top of who has responsibility and who has authority. And so let's just try to work it out. So in one example, let's say parent is pro trans, child is anti trans for whatever reason, doesn't matter. These are just probabilistic. Who has the authority to make the decision? Right now, I think it's legal authority as parent and guardian. And then who has the responsibility? I think it's legally parent and guardian right now. So I think in this instance, the parent or guardian is both responsible for the choice and has the authority to make the choice. If, based on what you guys were talking about, we split it and say child has the authority, parent has the responsibility, meaning you're not kicked out of your house, you're responsible for this person until they're 18. You're legally, you would be, if you do not feed them, if you do not clothe them, if you do not house them, you will go to jail. You are technically responsible for this human life, but you are not having the authority to make decisions. Like, let's just say your child is incapacitated and you have to decide, are you going to do organ donors, or the child needs a surgery and you're going to decide, do I grant authority to do, remove the kid's pancreas or whatever. I mean, obviously these are made up things, but like there's this thing. So let me just talk about why is authority and responsibility so important? If one has responsibility for a task or a mission, but they don't have the authority to execute it the way they think it should be done, their responsibility is crippling. Because if you see a problem, if you see we shouldn't go there, we should go here, whatever, but you don't have the authority to execute it, well, now you're just stuck with the responsibility of the outcome, which you might disagree with. Flip it around. If you have the authority to say, we're going this way, we're going that way, but you're not responsible for the outcome, I think the person who makes the call, who's the authority, is not invested in the outcome. There's no consequence that adjusts their behavior because someone else will be responsible for the error. You're like a dictator. I just say you're going to do this, and when it goes wrong, I'm just going to blame you because you're responsible.
Yeah.
So I see an inherent problematic logical issue with splitting responsibility and authority. And this is the basis for this question of what is the age of minority and what is the age of majority? And if you're a minor, is it agreed that the parent or guardian has both responsibility and authority? And once you're a major, you have authority and responsibility for yourself. And I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah,
Well,
that's so cool the way you phrased it like that. But yeah, go ahead, Tucker.
And I think responsibility is what is being a responsible parent. That dynamic has shifted greatly over the generations. Like I was still of the generation that we were outside from sunup till the streetlights came on. Our parents didn't know where we were at. They didn't know what we were doing. We were just feral children running around. Whereas you look at it today, that is not the case. Like parents have trackers on phones. Like they know exactly where their kids are at and oftentimes who they are with all the time. And they would say that's being responsible, where I would look at it and go, oh, that's helicopter parenting to me. Like let them go a little bit. Like we mostly all survived. I'm sure we lost a few along the way, but that was just how we were raised. So I think trying to define what is responsible is going to be a tricky, ever shifting dynamic. I think
moving
parents
target.
have always had the authority, but that's also a fuzzy area. Like there's different levels of authority and there's different types of authoritative leadership, and some are better than others. And I feel like this topic and many like it are are trying to boil down like what is the right way to raise a child.
Hmm.
There isn't one.
Right. There's
There
no
isn't
one
one.
right way
You
anyway.
have to be adaptive to the life you created because
Yeah.
they're their own being. They're
Yeah.
their own being. And you know, I was listening to that Inner Thoughts podcast yesterday, and he was talking about like the Matrix type knowledge upload. And he brought up a good point that for that to work, you would already have to have a model of every neuron in that person's brain. Because teaching Trinity to fly a helicopter with a program, that program's not going to work on Neo.
Right.
Because you're dealing with a different fundamental structure of neurons in the brain. And he said, you know, you may have to teach Trinity that flying the helicopter is like driving a go-kart, and you may have to teach Neo that it's like riding a horse, because that's the basis of where their understanding comes from. And there's no right way. There is no one way. Like
Right.
the
I
society
go ahead.
only works because it's flexible. There's no there is no utopia where everybody agrees on everything. It's never going to happen.
But then you have laws that are made to be uniform. And this is where we come back to this issue of age of consent and what are the law. I mean, there is a final authority of, if there's tension here, there is final authority. I mean, there's courts of law, there's, you know, like I'm thinking of, if your kid is truant, they don't come and take your kid and put him in jail. You know, your 10-year-old, they take the parent and you go to jail or whatever,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there are
Yeah.
issues. If you don't feed your kid, and Child Protective Services comes in and says this kid is malnourished and they're, you know, abused and neglected, well, they don't punish the kid, they punish the adult. So there is a responsibility there. So I'm just saying that in the real world, and I totally get what you're saying, Zucker. I appreciate everything, but at some point, a singular decision has to be made. Now, maybe it could be different at the federal, state, and local levels,
Yeah.
but you've got to agree that we're playing under a game where we have a spectrum of outcomes and a spectrum of biology, but there's a single rule set that you must abide by in this society.
And I think the key there is, or the pitfall to avoid is any notion that that rule set that is decided on is, you know, um, eternal or whatever. You know what I mean?
Objectively
Like
true. It's
at
not objectively true. Yeah,
right.
it's
Like
everywhere.
at best, it's like the best we can agree on today,
Yes.
and maybe it'll last several years. But the idea that like, and this will never be changed ever again is just
Yeah.
nonsense. You know, that's just basically saying like, I don't acknowledge that time moves forward for humans. I don't acknowledge that change happens, and it's just setting yourself up for failure that way, right? So I think that, you know, everything gels very nicely in my head between what you both were saying. That yeah, like that we do have to agree on some guidelines, you know, from time to time. And hey, you know, best case, like some of the guidelines are, you know, last for decades or hundreds of years because like they still make sense hundreds of years later. Um, but you know, every so often something happens like this increased awareness about the fact of human experience that is in this gender non-conforming spectrum. You know, that when we were kids, I was not aware of that. There's a really interesting documentary on Netflix called Disclosure. I would recommend checking out if you're interested in kind of, you know, digging more into trans. And I think it really is focused mostly on trans, but like in, you know, media and culture and stuff throughout the years. And it's really interesting to see how many times in movies, from like going back to black and white movies even, how many times the trans thing was portrayed as the villain, as the weird thing, as the like, oh my god, you know, oh, this person's the bad person in the movie. And it wasn't until, well, the last, I don't know, like 10 years ish, that shows like Schitt's Creek, which I don't watch, but I've heard about it, but shows that have, representation in a positive light of
Yeah.
people in the, in this gender nonconforming spectrum, in how interesting that is, that it relates to me. I'll go real specific here. I love the movie Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember like laughing like hysterically. You and I'm sure watched it, Tucker, when we were
Oh God,
kids.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And Jim Carrey is like an amazing actor. I think that's probably another, maybe even like whole topic, but like the Jim Carrey rabbit hole, and just some of the things that he says about life. It's fascinating guy. But anyway, back to Ace Ventura. The reveal at the end, and I, by the way, I don't think the reveal would have happened if it wasn't for The Crying Game. Did you guys ever see the movie The Crying Game?
Maybe a long time ago.
I know the cultural reference, but I don't think I actually watched the whole movie, but I understand what it is. Yes.
Yeah, and again, like this trans character was portrayed, like when the reveal happened, the character, the opposite character, the kind of love interest, didn't know that the character was trans, and immediately goes and throws up. It's like, it's just so repulsive that I have to vomit. And that was, that's kind of the trope that was sort of there with the trans experience in like media and stuff. And so that's why I think, these days there's so much more representation of what else is real about the trans experience. And I'm tying this all back to your point, Bob. Like, every so often, because there's more representation, because there's more awareness, it just happens on its own almost, where I think society kind of recognizes the need to reassess things that, laws, guidelines that have been in place that maybe don't make sense anymore. Like in 2014, it was, federally accepted that same-sex couples could get married. And, that's 10 years ago. So for all of American history up until then, same-sex couples couldn't get married. And how like weird that seems. But it's only been 10 years since it's been like, no, this is actually like makes sense as a society that we can do this, and who's got beef with it? Well, there's a religious aspect there, but separation of church and state and whatnot. And again, the law isn't forcing any same-sex marriages to happen. It's not forcing anything. It's just allowing it for people that want to get married that previously weren't allowed to get married because they love each other. So it is a weird thing that, there still is like some fight against that, but it's,
I mean, look at it this way too. 50 years ago, a woman could not open a checking account without her husband's approval.
Yeah, right.
40 years ago, a woman could not get a small business loan. Like, that's insane based on like our modern viewpoint on things.
Exactly.
At the time, absolutely appalling.
At the time, it probably didn't seem as insane. It probably did seem like, oh wow, this is a big shift towards this new direction. But these things do shift, and I just very strongly believe like this general direction is a positive one for more, what is it? Humanism, I think, might be the actual like term, where it's just, oh my God, we're all human beings, like we should all like.
I look at it this way. I mean, the people who want to live in the past and say things used to be better, every civilization before our own failed. Every one of them. And so we're constantly trying to do better than that,
Mm-hmm.
People look at the, manly men look at the Spartans, and that's where men were men. And you want to talk about authority and responsibility in that society. If you deemed your child as weak and you didn't think they were going to turn out the way you wanted, you went and hucked them off a cliff, literally. That was the
Yeah.
practice.
Barbaric.
Yeah, like we've moved beyond that. And guess what?
Yeah.
We have planes and we've been to the moon. Like
Right.
clearly
I
we did
know.
something that's more special than what they were doing. Like that's great. You 300 people fended off an army of thousands but eventually you failed and you
Yeah.
basically gone from history. Or that's all you exist as history. There's no Spartan race today. There's no Spartan society. So why do we idolize them when clearly they were failures?
Yeah.
And we
Interesting.
romanticize these notions from the past, but those past ideals did not lead us to where we are today.
And it's interesting to think because, well, what we're living in now, that's going to be the history in the past for future generations. And, really trying to think. I think, Bob, you were making a point in the previous episode. It's probably like during the three body episodes or whatever. But I think you had said that it's probably impossible to know in the moment what things are going to be culturally reprehensible for future generations, right? Because we're just so immersed in the kind of norm, which again is another reason why I think it's so cool that we're having these conversations about trans things, because it's something that's always been there, but it hasn't been there in the awareness, in the zeitgeist or whatever, and again, representation, awareness, I think all this stuff is very important because it just helps us. Again, I'll go back to my favorite quote about stereotypes. It helps us like hear more stories and be, um, it helps us from falling in the trap of just settling on one story and the one stereotype and just thinking like that's all I need to know about XYZ because I heard this one story. I just don't think that's like helpful at all in the long run,
Well,
Um,
Yeah.
let me talk real quick. I think one of the timelines Tucker put forth about 50 years ago and how what rights and abilities women had in society. I don't think it's a coincidence that much of the modern day progress socially is downstream of birth control pills, um, things that we take for granted, like the types of um, medicines, hormone replacements, surgeries, like things just weren't even an option, say 100
mhm.
years ago. It just literally did not. You couldn't escape from the biological reality of sex deterministic characteristics.
Mhm.
Post puberty, things start happening to one's body, and now we're talking about, yes, there's options, endocrinologists and prescriptions and surgeries and all these things. But what I'm getting at is go back. We talked about this a time or two. Go back. We make fun, perhaps. I don't think any of us, obviously, none of us are religious, formally religious, but imagine a time pre-religious, meaning pre-Christianity, let's just say, as the dominant culture of the West. Maybe it wasn't better before that. Maybe Christianity was the new tech. Maybe that, like thinking about saying, it's not okay to murder each other. It's not okay to lie, on each other. It's
Yeah.
not okay to have adultery, and all these other things. Like maybe before that, it was a terrible place to be relative to the time of Christianity, where one was unable to enforce laws. Like they didn't have an FBI, they didn't have a police station, they didn't have prisons and mental hospitals and stuff. You just had to be dealt with. I hate to say
Yeah.
it, but like the Spartans used to get chucked off the cliff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, progress is progress. Period. It never
Yeah.
ends. Hopefully, I mean, things do kind of turn around every once in a while. Meaning technologically, things turn around. I know that the Romans had technological feats that disappeared and were not uncovered until the Renaissance. So you have times of advancement and retracting in a technological sense, and then those technological advances foment the cultural advances and, I mean, just basic biology of a woman being able to prevent pregnancy is enormously liberating. So without that one thing, without that one ability, things, in my opinion, would not be the way they are today. Just that one thing, that one piece of tech has opened up a level of equality never seen before in human history. So we may mock or poke fun at or look back and say, you know, how anachronistic it is to be, you know, an orthodox religious person these days. Can't you see how equal we all are? Well, once upon a time, a woman did not have that choice. I mean, literally, it wasn't a choice to be made. There was one thing, which was, you know, impregnation, and that it was not always by choice, obviously. So I mean, there's things that change that reflect how the culture changes downstream of technology. So I think that's definitely going to be something to take into account, is how rapidly technology has been changing, and we're talking a matter of 2 generations,
Right.
3 generations, and it has turned over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of culture and society based on a biology that there was no technology to adjust on.
Well, I think touching on what you said, I mean, I think we have to accept that we are living in a post-biological society. You know, I've had knee surgery. If I wouldn't have had that, I would not be a functional human today.
Yeah.
Like I'm an altered human, but nobody's discriminating against me for fighting my biology and choosing to be a functional adult because I had knee surgery. So why is that not the same thing with gender reassignment? Like,
Yeah.
that's how they need to be a functional adult living in their meat cage. Fucking let them. Doesn't affect you.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that analogy.
I love that analogy. And once again, the rapidity. So we went from, you know, Kitty Hawk, first, you know, manned flight, heavier than air aircraft, to landing on the moon was like 69 years.
Right.
I mean, talk about fuck your brain up.
I know.
Think about that. Just think about,
right.
Never before had humans lifted off this earth in a powered flight, so a non you know, hot air balloon you could have, but non-hot, from that to landing boots on the moon in about 70 years. So
right, somebody could have been alive that whole time to see both of those things happen, right? Like, just wow.
Precisely, mind-blowing. So and it keeps going faster, it seems. And so here's my point. My point is, you're exactly correct, Tucker. We are in a post-biological epoch, and there are, you know, all things that come from that are going to have to be accepted, whatever that means, good, bad, indifferent. I'm just saying that the level of cultural change is not on the scale of lifetimes. Culture is this, what I call this something, historical knowledge. It's a historical knowledge base that gets transmitted to new symbiotic organisms that overlay as an adaptive strategy. And my point is, this level of cultural change is a next level thing that I don't think humans have ever dealt with. So we're in the midst of the new Kitty Hawk to Armstrong on the moon. We're in the midst of that right now at the cultural level.
Yeah,
because of the technology that is built up, because of the equality that is capable of being seen downstream of technological advances, because we're not beholden to our biology, because of all these things.
Yeah, because frankly, of well, yeah, keep going.
As you say, I'll go back to the 3 body problem, because I don't remember if we talked about this on the pod. I know I mentioned to you guys, but like hibernation, you know, like being able to see the future, in that you can hibernate for extended periods of time and then wake up in the future, and then, oh wow, everything has changed, And so these things are going to start snowballing. They already have. They are right now. And I don't know if humans have adapted to this level of cultural change ever before.
Yeah, no, there's a really good point there about that humans probably everywhere, um, just the ability that the internet provides to see, let's like go back prior to how easy it is to just on a device on your hand, in handheld device, like see what's happening on other parts of the planet, like before that existed, you know, news, right? Like you'd rely on like journalists, you know, traveling and reporting on it, and that was it, right? And
If you're literate, what if you're illiterate?
yeah, right. And so now it's like, um,
The world is so big now. The melting pot of ideas is so tremendously engaged and
yeah,
powerful. It's
the potential, the potential for a person to participate in that melting pot is just the opportunity there is yeah, unlike anything in human evolution history. So I do think, it's very interesting to think about the next generations that have no idea of anything else, right? Because they are born in devices in their hands or whatever, like
Totally.
exaggerating a bit, but you know what I mean, like that will not even you'd have to really like sit them down and like, by the way, back in my day, kind of a thing or whatever. I, you know, I don't know how quickly the species will like adapt to that, but I mean, it's going to happen anyway, I kind of think. Here's something interesting. I don't know if this was intentional, but I really liked your thought pattern there between authority and responsibility. I don't know if you intentionally didn't use the word power, but just to check the box on an obligatory Carl Sagan reference during the podcast, that phrase about like great power and great responsibility, that I don't think he coined that phrase, but it's definitely in Billions and Billions, and that book definitely came out before Spider-Man. So I always like
I
to.
think it was some ancient Greek thing, I believe, or
I
I mean,
think you're right.
it goes way back. But yes, I mean,
It
there's
seems
been
like
many.
it's timeless wisdom somehow. It seems
Yeah.
like, yeah, like there's So again, you didn't use power, you used the word authority, but I think it's a similar thing that
Well,
this
let me.
balance between those two is so critical in this process of evolution, even.
I agree, but you know what I was thinking about when we were talking about this was because we got to come up with. You can't have a spectrum of rules. Like there's got to be a rule set that we play the game by, and it brought up that thing last time about rollerball or whatever, roller basketball,
Oh,
whatever you want to call
right.
this
Yeah.
play. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's my take right now, just hot take. You've got a cohort of human beings that created a civilization, or their descendants of those who created and maintained a civilization and a society with a given rule set. And then you have these new parts of the game that open. It's almost like a video game where you unlock abilities or attributes. So like birth control pill, knee surgery, eye surgery, heart surgery, hormones, etc. All these different things that are unlocking, or like unlocking skills on a video game that the previous cohort did not have to play their game. And what I'm talking about is the transition then from the power holders in the past who were making, they had the responsibility and the authority to set the rules that most of us play by. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, they did the best they could with what they had. But the game has changed. There are new skills unlocked. There are new powers that are available. And there will be a transitionary period. I think we've all agreed. Progress will never cease. The only thing that never changes is change, always happens. So change is continuum. So what happens then in this period of time where we can say, what is the new unified rule set? And I don't know I don't have an answer for when, where, how it happens, but I am uncomfortable with applying a new rule set in a de facto manner that is just, it's like the beginning of a civil war kind of a feel, in that we're going to have disagreements with what the rules are if it's at the federal level. Like if it's winner take all, I don't know what would happen, because there's so many people that are legacy of this old way.
Mhm.
At the local level, I feel much more comfortable that change and progress can be made, and it does not impact, it's like, it's my party, you're not invited, so go have your own party kind of a thing. I don't know, but that's where I'm at, is like, what happened? Because at the end of the day, your kid or anybody you're responsible for, if you have responsibility for somebody, but they have the authority to go do a thing, I see problems. I just don't see a solution for, like, say for sake of argument, some child wishes to go through the process that your child did, John, and let's say you are not in agreement, but they have the authority to do this. Well, if they're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, do they have a driver's license? Can they drive themselves to the appointment? Do they have medical insurance?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have, the ability to get excuses from school so they can be absent? Do they have the ability to negotiate contracts? Do they have all the way down the line? I see problems. If it's not unified, where what we have in this system is parents and guardians have responsibility and authority, and children are essentially without any responsibility or authority. Like, you can't send a 12-year-old to prison, even if they kill somebody. They cannot go. They're not allowed. They're not responsible for themselves. Literally, in the eyes of the law, they are not responsible for themselves. So there's got to be a thing here where somebody has to pick a number, and I don't mean us, but societally, something has to happen where we have to formally say, and I think we're all agreeing this will happen. It is a transitionary period, no pun intended, where we're going to have a change of societal norms, much akin to the difference between a horse and buggy culture and a landing on the moon culture. It's going to happen. It's just, how do we get from here to there without pointing fingers at the past people who are playing under a different game with a different cultural awareness? It's going to be a tough one, is what I'm saying.
Well, it is. And I think the key to it is having these conversations civilly and openly and often.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to point out that this is just the beginning, because 100 years from now, on our current trajectory, a biological human isn't going to compete. It's going to be a conversation of what age are kids allowed to have implantable tech.
Right.
What
I
age?
think that's probably correct. Yes.
What age do we allow children to have artificial joints and synthetic muscles implanted? Because that's where this is going.
Yeah.
There's no short of complete nuclear annihilation or asteroid strike, this train's not going to stop.
You guys ever see Gattaca?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not trying to say that that's what's going to happen at all, but I do see that there is a oscillation. So I think 100% the average of the oscillation is what you're talking about, but you got to be aware that a lot of humans don't like change, especially if you are in the top position now. People do not like to be inverted, and they will fight back. And people who are the underdog, they don't like to be the underdog. They want to be top dog. And so it's a never-ending oscillation of these things. But I agree with the overall trajectory of what you just said, Tucker. Like, that's going to be this will be an antiquated, in 100 years, this will be an antiquated conversation.
Yeah. In 100 years, you're going to be able to buy on-the-shelf genitalia and just swap it out and do whatever you want for the day. I mean,
for the day, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, or you'll be
imagine
living virtually in a virtual
I was gonna say,
world.
Right.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
it's coming, and I think the key is like we talk about all the time. It's being rigid in your thinking and just saying, this is what I think, this is what I've always thought, this is what I always will think. That the only person you are harming by being that way is yourself, because society will move on without you, and
Yeah.
they'll just leave you behind. And it's like, I can look at myself. I grew up in the 90s. We called things gay, and it wasn't a positive thing.
Right.
I'm not that person anymore. Like, I've grown, I've adapted, I've accepted that that's just such a small, insignificant part of who people are. It's not something you should define them and put them into categories by. And I'm leaving behind people who are still stuck in that mindset. Like, I don't need you to be as big a part of my life if you're just stuck on hating someone for being who they are, that doesn't have any effect on your life at all. Like, I don't need that in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way society's going, where, if you want to be a hugely rigid thinker and just put people into different categories and divide, you're just going to get left behind and you're going to be lonely.
Yeah.
let me ask you, Tucker. I think this is a pivotal moment in the conversation. What if you're like me and you believe that most people are not making conscious decisions
Mm,
and that they're justifying, rationalizing, narrating after the fact what their subconscious has decided upon, and their subconscious is being programmed by the culture and by their environment and by their individual experiences. And so you end up with this. What's that guy's name? Do you guys remember that guy who said essentially he's the anti-free will guy?
Robert
oh yeah,
Sapolsky.
forget that we're
Sapolsky,
not
thank you, Josh.
responsible for who we are,
Anything,
basically.
nothing. You're responsible.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not that absolutist, but I'm saying, like, say the majority of people, just a large plurality even of people, are effectively automatons based on their genetics and life history. And to ask them to change is like asking a Roomba to stand up and dust the
Yeah.
windowsills or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So what do we do about them?
Well, I guess my pushback on that would be our subconscious, I think, is largely based off a life none of us have ever lived. It's largely based off of tens or hundreds of thousands of years of being hunter-gatherers, of being, you know, basically living off the land, and then we're thrown into this modern society with a subconscious that doesn't know how to function in it, but we figure it out. And I think that's where maybe the consciousness comes into play, is that I think if it was purely subconscious, we'd all fail. Because I think largely the framework's built upon an existence that we have no modern correlation to. So I do think we're more than just our subconscious reacting to things. I would push back against that. I think they're the big piece that guides us, but I don't think. I think if that was the biggest piece, we'd all just fail.
I'm saying until you become, or unless and until you become aware of the man behind the curtain, you are as the Roomba. But once you do become awakened or enlightened or what have you, yes, absolutely, change is viable and change is there. And let me call on a personal experience here. And it also calls back to the child age of consent issue. I think I might have mentioned this to you guys, but I'll just document this real quick. When I was a kid, I did not want to be like my parents. I was definitely not trying to follow the leader. I was not okay with their devout Catholicism. I went to religious schools, parochial schools. I was seeing myself as a free thinker. and independent, individualistic. Fast forward, now I have children. And by the way, my parents are obviously very much intent in guiding me and having me follow the path, and this is the way and this is what works, and they're very very much hoping that I would be following the path. And then fast forward, and now I have children. I'm not religious, but I have children, and I see now from the parents' point of view what it means to want your children to be successful and happy and healthy and fulfill their potential. So now I'm looking back and seeing what an ignorant pig I was as a child. Not saying that my parents were correct, but I saw what they were trying to do as being oppressive and harmful, if you will, when in reality they were trying their best to get me further in life. And I can see that now, having my kids, that I would want the best for them. And I'm going to try to give them my wisdom so they don't have to learn the hard way. And I'm going to try to give them structure and set an example and live my life the way I hope, guides them. But I see there's a tension. I see this difficulty in the nature of the thing, because what if my kids want to go a different way? I don't know. I mean, my kids are pretty young still, but I feel compelled to help them get forward. And I don't know, could that be counterproductive? I don't know. But I could also see myself protecting them from making mistakes I've made, huge mistakes. I've made tremendous mistakes that I was not even aware I was making. And so my level of awakeness and enlightenment, I hope I can pass along to them to help them further themselves. And on it goes. But I don't have an answer. I'm just stuck in the middle of this thing, and that's where I'm at. I'm in the middle of this tension.
Part of it, and because I can relate with a lot of what you just said, and there was a period where Jay was writing, like doing a lot of creative writing, and he wrote like 17 chapters of like a fantasy story. And I was like, this is going to be your job, your career. You'll be a writer. Oh my God. It was like, and looking back, it's like, oh, I probably could have been like way cooler about that, and, and even wondering like, oh, did I overdo it? I mean, I've definitely wrestled with like, what could I have done? But anyway, what I feel like I've learned or am trying to embrace more and more is there is it's very useful, I think, to just embrace that like none of us are fortune tellers, none of us can see the future, you know what I mean? And like the best we can do sometimes like is just what we think is the best in that moment, and I think if the kid's best intentions or for a happy, healthy life, if that's at the root of it, I think it's less likely to go wrong. I think this kind of funny story about not being able to predict the future. When Jay was born, like Kim and I very quickly realized that trying to shield him from swear words was going to be pointless, because if any of the band was around, it's like, hey guys, don't say, like, that's not going to work, dude. Like, plus, and not that I'm like throwing the band under the bus, like, plus Kim and I, like, we just casually shit here, fuck that, whatever. I mean, it's not like, I don't know, maybe everybody's has a friend who's just like, every other word is fuck. Like I can definitely think of like a few friends, and so Kim and I weren't like just every other word, but we definitely used it casually. And anyway, so we had this decision. We just said like, we're not going to try to shield Jay from that. And I mean, this goes back to when he started being able to talk. in fact, I'm just remembering this. It's one of those like telephone game memory things. It almost seems like what really happened, could it have been this? But this is definitely the story we told for years. It was like right after he started talking. I was in the living room. I was laying on the couch. I think I was just like exhausted, just laying there. And Jay walked in and he just was like, motherfucker. and we just see it hilarious. And anyway, so the point of the story is like, how we approached it was like, hey, there's words that if you say it in school, you'll probably get in trouble. Maybe this is trying to bridge that authority responsibility type of gap, right? Where like if there's words that if you said it in school, you probably get in trouble, so just don't say it in school. If you say it around grandma or grandpa, it'll probably be kind of weird. But like around us, you're not going to get in trouble. Like we say it, like it's fine. And so what happened? Like I don't know if since that motherfucker episode when he was, just first speaking, he has, I don't think ever swore in front of Kim and I, even in his writing. Like sometimes he'll write something and he'll be reading it to us and he'll pause at the word. He just doesn't want to like swear in front of us. It's like very weird. Like I could not have predicted that, like, it's so weird. I guess that's my whole point, is going back to like, no, we're not fortune tellers. Like the whole reason we did that was because we thought it would be not worth the effort to try to shield him from these words. So we were just like open, and he doesn't even use them out loud in front of us. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, I wouldn't have thought that that's how that would have, worked out. So anyway, that's part of my, and I can't remember now if you're asking a specific question, Bob, but I definitely sympathize with the what do you do kind of question that floats around there,
I'm trying to get at points of view. So when you're at the beginning of your story and you only have your first point of view, it seems absolute. But perhaps when you get to the middle or to the end of your story, you've gone through multiple variations of points of view, such that now you can see from the beginning what your parents' point of view was, but you can't ever really see that in the beginning. And so
yeah,
I'm just trying to share the understanding that I don't have it figured out, and I'm not young, and I don't think I will ever have it figured out. I don't know if there is a figuring out. I think we were all agreeing on it. I don't know if there is a singular solution here other than empathy and trying to communicate openly and honestly.
Right.
True
curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity. Thank you, John. Curiosity.
Yeah.
And openness to change. I mean, it's very difficult, but once again, the arc of the thing is usually not just a straight line. You're literally going through changes of life and changes of experience and maturity and events that happen that are outside of your control. And I mean, there's many, many, many variables here that one size does not fit all.
Right. Yep.
Live and let live, man.
Yep. Well,
it's hard. I think people, what we're trying to cultivate here is appreciation of the other instead of fear, and trying to steer society and individuals just to be curious and not to. None of us have it all figured out. Nobody has it all figured out. We never will have it all figured out. But you can have a differing opinion without being oppressive, without being discriminatory, without being really involved. Live your life. But just because you're, say, a straight white male, doesn't mean you should have authority to decide what other people do. Like, just live your life. Let people live theirs.
Yeah. Well, we'll plug the podcast you mentioned earlier. Inner Cosmos, I think, is the name of the podcast. But David Eagleman, and we mentioned that the last episode and this other one that you found this week. It's called "Can Societies Fight Better?" And there's some advice. Like, listen to this dude talk about in groups and out groups, and like how part of this is just our biology and the way our brains work. And I feel like that's just hearing him explain that these are kind of natural biological processes is kind of like liberating in a way, because I can, like, Bob, kind of to your point, like I can consciously work to upload or change my subconscious model, so the next time I'm confronted with this, I can do it a little different, and I can keep practicing that, and I can do it a little different, and I can get better and better, instead of just being like, well, I'm just a victim to my subconscious and it's not even worth trying to change it. I'll just, maybe that works for some people. I suppose, like, there's probably
Well,
certain aspects of my life that works with, but like in this context of like empathizing, like, oh man, that is like massive and powerful to me,
I agree with your take on what you're doing right now, and I can see it. I know it's happening. My take is the people who are not doing it that way, they're not thinking that they're stuck in their ways. They are thinking that they are doing this consciously. They are tricked by the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, and that goes back. Well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and it's that illusion, the illusion of free will. That is the insidious part. That is the part that allows people to become entrenched in their ideas, because they're never going to update their subconscious model when they always rationalize why they were doing things the right way. So you don't get the loss update of the weights. That's my point.
Yeah.
Is once you can be open and say, you know what, I fucked up, I made a mistake, that's when you get the change. But so many of us are incapable, literally incapable, by the illusion of this, Maggie driving the car effect, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That they're justifying. When you make a justification of why you chose this, when you didn't actually consciously choose the thing, you're not going to update that model. The weights are the same. You will repeat that behavior over and over and over again.
Yeah, and it is tricky, like you said. It's like you can put them at gunpoint and say, "Stop doing that." You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think the question you asked is like, what do you do with the, I don't think you try to force anything on them. I think at a base level, there's got to be like, let's just, hopefully we can all agree that like we shouldn't be taking rights away from people. Like, if all this stuff ends up at like discussions about like what legislation, blah blah blah, at a base level, hopefully even the people that don't agree with it can agree, like, but this right already exists, let's not take that away. And then, but if somebody is just not interested in changing, I mean, I would guess, like, in our lives, like right now, we can think of maybe especially someone from like an older generation, that it's just like they are set in their ways, and it's not even like worth trying to like change. And maybe that's okay, because they're not out trying to like destroy people that are disagreeing with them. They're just living their life and disagreeing with whatever. And I think that's okay. We can still like coexist with people even if we disagree. And even, the guidelines for me is like, there really isn't a reason to get violent, I think, and let's not like take rights away from people. And it seems pretty simple in that context to me. I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, but kind of where my thoughts gravitate to.
My take home is make your own game. I mean, it goes back to the party analogy thing. If you're making your own game, who sets the rules? Well, it's your game. You obviously set the rules. So someone else stepping in. But if you're playing someone else's game, try to
play by their rules. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can compel them through conversation, and you can compel them through examples, and try to be influential in your ideas. I think where we come into breakdowns is groups fighting over the controls of power, like literally trying to grab the wheel from each other. That becomes very problematic throughout history. And I don't know what happens next, because I think we're in a transitionary period. So there is that. But it seems like the best case scenario would be for, to have a different rule set instead of applying a different rule set globally over the current game, because people have been playing this game for a long time. a lot of weird metaphors here. I apologize, but trying to create an example of success from scratch. Create an example of success independent of the authority and the responsibility of the other game set. I think that is a clear path to success. Whether it's realistic, I don't know. It's probably not. Just like, I love the Turing test idea, but I don't know how that could be implemented without de facto giving the keys to the person who makes the test. That's kind of, you're just going to say they're the king now because you set the test up, and the test is going to flow the way the test maker sets it as. And so you'll get the outcome you decide when you make the test, or something like that. I mean, it's just very difficult to get a giant unified direction, regardless of right or wrong. It's just, to get a unified direction is half the battle. And so things like, Christianity or other world religions, Islam, Judaism, whatever, it's not so much are they right or wrong, it's that everybody plays by the same rules, roughly speaking. I know there's interpretations, but the concept of just a giant block of humans not having to negotiate every little bit of right or wrong. Everybody agrees this is the framework. These are the rule sets. We're playing this game together. This is our culture. And moving forward from there, not having to stop and micromanage every little piece of it. That makes for a very successful society.
Well, and I also think we need to be truthful about the society that we come from and the society we're becoming, and that legislation based on oppressing an outgroup is not the direction we're going. And it's not the direction we ever should have gone, but we used to, and we're not doing that anymore. And clearly there's political parties who are fighting tooth and nail to not let that concept go. But at some point, you have to realize the writing's on the wall, and that we're not going back to times where you could just write off whole groups of people. We're not doing that. And if you try to do that, you're gonna realize that there's going to be a level of pushback on that is much bigger than you thought there was going to be. Because as a society, we've largely moved beyond that. We're not doing that anymore. And there's always going to be people who won't let that go. But they're going to find themselves lonely. And they're going to find themselves eventually that they are the other. And that society is largely left them behind. And yeah, you can sit with your group of racist, sexist, misogynistic friends and talk about the good old days. But I think you'll find that you're just kind of wallowing in misery at that point. And you're just kind of wallowing in your own anger and frustration, when in reality you had a choice. And that choice was to accept the fact that you don't get to decide how other people live. You get to decide how you live.
Yeah.
And if you decide to be an angry, hateful person, then that's, I mean, you're allowed to do that, but doesn't seem like much of a life.
Yeah. Yeah. We are over quite a bit here. It does seem like we could just talk about this forever.
I think Tucker put a nice point on it right there. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. I think we can kind of close this one, at least for now. Maybe we come back to it one day. There was just two other things I wanted to share quickly, just, I don't know, fun things I thought that were helpful for me, with pronouns and stuff. So I think this will be real quick. Do you guys know what a contronym is?
No.
So it's
no.
it's like a homonym. A homonym is a word that has multiple meanings, same spelling but multiple meanings. So a contronym is specifically the contradictory meanings. And I just learned this recently, but I think it's kind of related here. So like an example is like dust. The verb dust means to remove dust from a surface, but it also means to cover lightly, like with like powdered sugar, you dust powdered sugar on something. So the word literally means two opposing things, right? Throw out. I'm going to discard something, throw out, but I'm going to throw out some ideas. I'm going to contribute something. One is removing, one is adding, but our brains are able to comprehend this stuff. And a lot of these things happen culturally, like sick. When we were growing up, sick meant you didn't feel good, But now, like, sick means amazing. Also, so dude, that's so sick. So I know that pronouns and contronyms are two different parts of speech, but my point is, detaching the pronouns he, him from sex organs is not something our brains are incapable of doing. We can process these words, these pronouns, in the way that people are using them. There isn't, like, what I feel like I've learned is there really isn't a logical reason to just be like, no, he means testicles, period. You know what I mean? So I liked that kind of idea. And then the other, I guess, pushback I've heard, and I can appreciate, I even had this my own self, because when Jay was first bringing stuff up, he wanted to try they pronouns, they, them pronouns. And the pushback I've heard, even just recently, someone said they is plural. They doesn't work for singular. And I say, au contraire, because you can swap out he or she for they. And that's incredibly useful if you write haikus where your syllable count matters. I found a really great haiku from our friend Tyler in California that he submitted on our page. And it goes like this. When someone's heart breaks, they may become self-aware or self-destructive. And again, he's using they to refer to someone, singular. He could have said when someone's heart breaks, he or she may become self-aware, but that wouldn't be the right syllable count. So, oh, wow, he can use they, and it works in a singular sense. And look, my brain didn't explode. Nothing like fell apart. Like, we can do this. We can use they as a singular. We do. So I just wanted to share that, because I imagine every so often you might come across someone that's like, no, they's plural. And now you can be like, well, actually, you can use it as a singular as well, so you're welcome. But yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, again, thank you guys for having this conversation. I don't know what we'll be doing next week. But I think we kind of feel wrapped up here, right, on the topic?
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, for now, right?
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, beautiful. So yeah, we will figure out what we're going to do next week. I'm sure it'll be awesome. If you're listening, please hit us up, sendingpoets@gmail.com. We'll try to keep up with all of the zeros of emails we get. Anyway, but I did find a good quote.
Someone's going to be the first.
Technically, James, the drummer, he was the first. He listened to, like, when we first episode probably that came out. It's like, hey, by the way, we're doing this, and he did send a pretty complimentary, like, hey, right on, good, keep it up. I don't know if he still listens, but anyway, but you can be the second, and maybe we could say, like, James doesn't count, he's our friend or whatever. I don't know, so maybe you could be the first stranger. How about that?
I'll take it.
But I did find a good quote from John Adams this week that I thought was interesting. So it'll be a fun place to leave this on. So, but yeah, again, thanks guys. Thanks for listening. And here's this quote from John Adams. Children should be educated and instructed in the principles of freedom